Watch this. Can you trust your media?
This episode and others like it are made possible by the generous support of my patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to help me produce more content like this and get early access to every new video, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/secondthought. Can you trust the media? It's a common question, and one that's popping up more and more often in our increasingly polarized world. Over the years, we've seen numerous examples of news networks twisting the truth to fit a certain narrative, or spreading outright lies in order to gain public support for military initiatives. Today, with more news at our fingertips than ever before, it's important to really consider the question: can you trust the media? So, in this episode, that's what we're going to discuss. Renowned academic and social critic Noam Chomsky once said, "He who controls the media controls the minds of the public."
Wow, sounds a lot like anti-Semitism to me, sweaty. Noam Chomsky is canceled. What an anti-Semite.
Manufacturing Consent, his work explaining the failure of capitalism and corporate control of the US, he focuses on highlighting the role.
Edward Herman is the most underappreciated, underrated, and non-mentioned academic in the world
that the media has played for decades, and continues to play, in manipulating public opinion for the benefit of private interests. In today's climate, it's not hard to find people who denounce the mainstream media as a pile of lies and
Manufacturing Consent sounds like some weird PUA anti-consent bullshit. It's pretty fucking problematic, to be honest. That's really good. Yeah, because the point of manufacturing consent is actually a how-to on how to do manufacturing consent, and that it's good and a necessity.
Fabrications, but then run to Fox News or other such networks as a reliable source of information, not realizing that, whomever they listen to, all modern news outlets are controlled by a set of interests that have nothing to do with sharing useful, educational, or trustworthy information. Just 21 companies own all.
I mean, this guy's in the media, and HasanAbi is also in the media. This is how new media works. There is no one answer to trusting the media because this isn't monolithic. No, we are described. First of all, many people have asked Noam Chomsky about what he thinks about manufacturing consent in the age of the internet. Matt Taibbi being one of the famous people that have asked this question and tried to get a good answer to write about. But we are still within this framework of manufacturing consent because we are outside of the mainstream media, and that's precisely why there are still limitations to what we can say and what we can't say. But ultimately, because we are outside of the framework of legitimate media entities, we can get away with saying whatever the fuck we want, and even speaking out against mainstream media talking points or against American imperialism, where there's bipartisan consensus within mainstream media. However, that comes along with being vilified, or in a lot of instances just considered illegitimate.
All the media outlets in the US, 5 of which own all the major news networks of the country. You might remember from one of my earlier videos that these big 5 are Comcast, Disney, News Corp, National Amusements, and AT&T. This quasi-monopoly allows those who own these companies to feed the nation a twisted version of reality, and make people believe whatever they want us to believe. This creates an environment in which only the news that fits the interest of the individuals who own these private companies makes it to the public. This corporate domination of the media goes hand in hand with the corporate domination of the government, and perpetuates a system where absurdly wealthy individuals run the show without ever needing to be elected. There's a common opinion among many Americans that the media is entirely the domain of liberal elites. That is not the case. Far from being controlled by coastal liberals trying to paint all conservatives as racist and homophobic, the mainstream media is controlled by the same overarching interest groups as supposedly alternative media like Fox and Voice of America. All modern news sources.
Anyone who thinks Fox is alternative media is also a fucking delusional moron. Like, they are literally the most mainstream of the mainstream. They are literally the most successful news operation in the fucking country, okay? And the same conservative voices also own Sinclair Broadcasting, which is like 70% of the TV market to begin with. It's fucking nuts.
Have become a single, unified front aimed at manufacturing consent and steering the conversation away from real news and towards pointless aesthetic disagreements. Those who own the networks may want to appear to espouse different views, but at the end of the day, they're all staunchly capitalist and benefit from the same tax cuts as every other rich business mogul. But since they have to maintain a veneer of objectivity, we get news networks that fight over petty cultural squabbles while quietly agreeing on all the big stuff. The news you see today has very little to do with informing you about what is going on around the world in a clear and objective manner. Today's news outlets only focus on two things: pandering to the biases of their audience and indirectly promoting the financial agendas of specific industries. For most of its existence, the American media has painted our way of life as the best way of life, whether for its economic opportunity for right-leaning media or standards of democracy and fairness for left-leaning media. We have been fed the lie that America is the #1 country in the world and indoctrinated to believe it. The only thing America can truly claim the #1 spot for is wasting money on the military. And how do we justify that? Just turn on the news. For decades, the US media has created news stories to glorify intervention in foreign countries, often lying outright about certain events.
Good stuff. Good stuff that the New York Times engaged in. Things that you hear even now from the American government's position against Iran, the saber rattling that you hear from the American government about how we need to deal with Iran, and that's why it's a justification for why we need to keep selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, because Iran threatened Saudi Arabia's, who was our most valuable ally, our foreign partner in the Middle East outside of Israel. They need to maintain their regional sovereignty. Everything is Iran bad, and that's why we need to fucking keep doing engagements, military engagements in the region.
Tiny number of terror attacks on American soil are covered from all angles, but the vast and ongoing devastation wrought in the Middle East by the US military and our murderous sanctions barely get a mention. And the media doesn't only avoid mentioning US interventions, it also avoids those of its friends and allies. In the 1970s, when Indonesia invaded East Timor and occupied neutral territory, killing thousands, the media said nothing. Indonesia was a US ally. Today, the conflict in Yemen has been labeled as one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, and it's been going on for 6 years. Innocent people are dying in atrocious conditions every single day. Have you seen any media coverage of this lately? Has Fox, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, or any...
No, because it's our guns that are actually doing it. So obviously, when our guns are doing it, it's actually a good thing. We need to keep giving Saudi Arabia more of those guns and bombs, especially the gay bombs at Raytheon, because they are LGBT friendly. So, according to the Human Rights Watch, they are the most LGBT friendly company of 2019. So, sorry, sweaties in Yemen, you are going to be hit with bombs.
Any of the others said anything about the plight of the Yemeni people lately? No. Why is that? Because the Saudi army is largely responsible for the murders. And who arms the Saudi army? The United States. Once again, corporate interests and the country's bottom line supersede the right to accurate information. No matter which way these outlets lean, they are all guilty of filtering the information we receive to suit the interest of...
Our guns with the people doing the killing don't get enough of the blame, treated as POC, they have no agency. I find that to be rather idiotic, because no, the people that are fucking doing it should get a fuckload of blame. I criticize the Saudi government's actions all the goddamn time, just like I criticize the American government's actions all the goddamn time. It is so psychotic. Also, you're talking about Saudi soldiers now. Talk about what you can control, which is not giving them arms, and also actually, telling them, stop fucking murdering people. This is something that we could do. We could do that, but we are not.
Of their owners. Private ownership of the media has turned information into a commodity, not a right. And commodities have a value, which can be turned into profit. The name of the game in American media is not to inform, engage, and empower the world, as CNN so eloquently puts it, but to sell, manipulate, and turn a profit for shareholders. Like anything, information is a good that can be sold to the highest bidder, and corporations are willing to pay a lot of money to get the information they want in front of your eyes. It doesn't matter if you think all immigrants are criminals, or if you think Trump should be impeached 3 or 4 more times. There's a network out there which has some information to sell you, and it...
So here's the thing, this is a good question. How's the media controlling everything if we're talking about it right now? Okay, so Chomsky talks about this. This is one of the few issues where, this is one of the few areas where Noam Chomsky and Slavoj Žižek agree. Okay, it's 2 different forms of control. In the neoliberal Western capitalist world, the media creates a presence or creates an idea of freedom, but that is confined within a box of acceptable opinions. Okay, And that box further and further shifts to the right because that benefits corporations, and that benefits the American manufacturers, gun manufacturers, small arms, and weapons manufacturers in general. So that comfortable box of ideas that you can have within mainstream media shifts further and further to the right and is more and more reactionary. In the Eastern world, where there is a lot of press limitations, there is a lot of control, authoritarian control rather, you understand that that control is enforced and that you are not getting the correct information, or that the press is always going to lie to you because it's the state press, or it's at least controlled by the state, and therefore you have an understanding that you need to be skeptical of the information that you are filtering in. So if you look to like Soviet bloc or Soviet era people who lived in the Soviet era, they will tell you like, the government's fucking lying to me. I know the government's fucking lying to me, so I need to figure out the truth on my own. So there's benefits to both, right? I prefer the Western way of going about it. Okay, making it seem like you are actually advocating for freedom, but limiting the control of information or the flow of information to an acceptable confine, an acceptable box of ideas.
Exactly how to do so. Polarization in modern media is not diversity. It is not choice. It is simply a blatant abuse of human nature. We all like to hear things that we agree with. The name for this phenomenon is confirmation bias. If I think socialism is a conspiracy to destroy America, I'll turn on the news channel that agrees with me and reinforces my belief, which frankly is all of them, but Fox tends to use that line most effectively. The American media has mastered the art of pandering to its audience, and will continue to do so indefinitely as long as it helps to turn a profit. It doesn't matter if what they are saying is even remotely close to the truth. To make matters worse, the American obsession with free speech has created a media ecosystem where corporate mouthpieces can say whatever they want, asserting their unalienable right to spew meticulously crafted propaganda into millions of households. Despite the fact that the First Amendment does not apply to news networks, our obsessive fixation on being able to say whatever we want, regardless of truthfulness, has given news anchors an excuse to lie outright. These days, free speech means nothing more than I can say whatever I want and promote it as the truth to whoever is willing to listen to me. This perversion of what free speech really means has removed any and all accountability from the media to base their claims in factual truth. Anyone can now go ahead and say whatever they want on air as long as it generates more revenue to the channel. That's the bottom line. If it brings in more viewers, if it's profitable, it's the truth. The best example of this is the way that panels are constructed to debate topics on air. For decades, human-caused climate change has been established as fact, and over 97% of experts agree it's happening. So why is it that every news panel contains as many experts on the matter who accurately report the evidence of climate change as irrelevant grifters who do not? This is not to offer unbiased news. It is intended to muddy the waters so that people continue to doubt established science. Human-induced climate change does not suit the interest of the hugely powerful oil, gas, automotive, cruise, dairy, and meat lobbies, so they make sure that the media gives as much attention to nonsense as it does to fact. The most damning bit of evidence when it comes to climate change coverage is the fact that Exxon, one of the largest polluters on the planet, was one of the first to conduct extensive studies on the effects of fossil fuel use. Their internal documents reveal that they knew just how bad the problem would become, and instead of working with policymakers to find a solution, they buried their findings and launched a decades-long disinformation campaign to keep the public in the dark. When you see climate debates on TV, be aware that you're watching an ongoing oil and gas lobby crusade to maintain their profits.
That's precisely why the only thing that you heard in the aftermath of Texas, the Texas crisis that occurred because of the ice storms and shit like that, the only thing that you heard was about how windmills were frozen shut, even though windmills were not the reason why Texas was having an energy crisis, was experiencing an energy crisis. But that was the oil and gas industry immediately switching the conversation over to something that is silly, and stunlocking the liberal outlets, the supposedly liberal outlets, into constantly talking about that as well. Fucking bullshit.
expense of the survivability of the planet and the future of our species. Would you find it normal if anytime a NASA scientist is interviewed to talk about, say, progress on Mars, there was a flat earther there to contrast views? Of course not. That would be a waste of time and would only serve to dilute the facts presented by the expert in an effort to sow doubt. That's exactly what news networks are for. Not to inform, but to obfuscate. To prolong the profitability of damaging industries as long as possible. To bring in views by making people angry or afraid. We are a long way from what reliable media is supposed to look like. There is no such thing as a trustworthy news channel or honest media outlet. You cannot trust the media. However, that does not mean that everything they say is a waste of time and you should only believe what fits your views. That path only leads to further division and the destruction of trust among the people.
That's why I always talk about what the personal interests might be for individual outlets. Like, there are certain biases that are just always going to remain, right? So you have to recognize those biases whenever you look at the media, whenever you look at a particular outlet and their coverage. Like, state broadcasters oftentimes will have will obfuscate the truth whenever they're talking about their own states, but are usually providing decent coverage when it comes to other states. Like state broadcasters like the BBC are relatively reactionary when it comes to their coverage over whatever the fuck is going on in their own in their own country, but will provide decent coverage to issues that pertain to the United States of America. Al Jazeera is another good example of this. You know what I mean?
Popularity of crooked politicians like Donald Trump, Jair Bolsonaro, and Nigel Farage has been facilitated by the lies of supposedly alternative, mostly right-wing media. These outlets, financed by the wealthy elite, have worked hard at selling the lie that by voting for these people, we are supporting someone like us. People, someone who understands. That is a complete lie. There is nothing like us about these people. They are part of the elite. They've simply decided to try a new approach.
Like, motherfuckers on crutches on probably disability payments are running around advocating for Donald Trump. You know what I mean? When, like, his Republican Party is responsible for you not getting the appropriate amount of disability payments that you deserve.
There is nothing like us about these people. Are part of the elite. They've simply decided to try a new approach to further divide us and strengthen their hold and that of their ultra-wealthy friends on society. Nowhere is there a better example of this than on Fox News, where news anchor Tucker Carlson continues to rail against the establishment, blame immigrants, and claim his bias. They agree wholeheartedly and reinforce their views every day, thinking that they're being provided real information by someone just like them. Tucker Carlson gets paid $10 million a year to spout venomous lies on TV. He rails against the elites while being the heir to a frozen food fortune built on the back of abusive immigrant labor. He is not a man of the people. He sits firmly at the table of the elites and uses populist rhetoric to manipulate his audience and make sure that the status quo is preserved so that his giant bank account continues to fatten. The one giant propaganda machine fueled by the wealthy for the wealthy, all with the support of a corporate-controlled state. News outlets are doing an incredible job of keeping the population divided and at odds with each other over frivolous nonsense so that no meaningful change can ever take place and the status quo that makes the rich richer is maintained. Our media fits perfectly into a framework of neoliberal hegemony, and not a word that comes out of their mouths deviates from that mission. The best thing we can do is to recognize this fact and attempt to understand others and their biases, as well as recognizing our own. If we truly want to overcome the mind control operation of the elites, then we need to stop listening to them and start listening to each other. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that this kind of content is...
This is Second Thought. The channel is Second Thought. He's great. He's a friend of the show who makes these videos. They're great.